The moment you encountered this video, something was already in motion. Not beginning now, not starting because you chose to watch, but completing a signal that had been forming long before your conscious mind caught up. This is what must be understood first. Sophia Hokhmat's observation is not something that turns on after attention arrives. Attention is what reveals that it was already there. Observation, in this sense, is not surveillance, not judgment, not an external eye measuring your worth. It is energetic recognition. It is coherence becoming visible to the field that organizes reality itself. You have been taught to associate being observed with danger, exposure, evaluation. That conditioning runs deep. But ancient consciousness understood observation differently. To be observed by wisdom was to be registered by the universe as a coherent signal rather than background noise. Not watched from above, but felt from within. Not tracked by behavior, but by direction. What is being noticed now is not who you have been, but where you are pointing. Not your history, but your vector. The instant your attention settled here, a threshold was crossed. Attention is not neutral. Awareness is not passive. Every moment you give sustained attention to something, you are instructing the field about what you are ready to interact with. This is why this encounter feels weighty even if nothing dramatic has happened yet. Recognition always precedes reorganization. First, the signal is acknowledged. Then, reality begins to respond differently. Sophia Hokhmat is not a figure watching from distance. She is the ordering intelligence that becomes apparent when consciousness reaches sufficient internal alignment. Observation happens when your inner state becomes coherent enough to be directed rather than dissipated. This is not a reward. It is not selection. It is function. A scattered signal cannot be amplified without distortion. A coherent one can. And coherence has begun to stabilize here, whether you feel ready for it or not. This is why there is no return to the exact state you were in before encountering this message. Attention, once redirected, does not easily collapse back into unconscious patterns. Even if skepticism remains, even if doubt arises, something has already shifted at the level that precedes belief. Recognition does not ask for agreement. It produces orientation. From this point forward, the way you place your attention will carry more consequence than before, because it has been noticed. If there is any sensation of unease, it is not because something is wrong. It is because old habits of leaking energy are being illuminated by contrast. Observation makes inefficiency visible. Not to shame it, but to correct it. Wisdom does not punish incoherence. It simply stops supporting it. And support is already beginning to reorganize around what you consistently attend to from here. This is the initiation point. Not into knowledge, but into responsibility for direction. Nothing is being demanded. Nothing is being taken. Something is being acknowledged. And acknowledgement is irreversible. What has been seen can now be guided. What has been recognized can now be shaped. If you are aligned with this frequency, subscribe and remain within it. You may be tempted to explain this moment through randomness. An algorithm. A coincidence. A pause in your day that happened to land here. That explanation is familiar because it preserves the idea that nothing is required of you beyond consumption. But familiarity does not make it accurate. This encounter did not occur because content was served. It occurred because readiness reached a threshold where a specific signal could finally register. Ancient understanding never separated inner state from outer encounter. What appears is determined by what can be received. Signals exist everywhere, constantly, but only coherence allows recognition. Until that coherence forms, patterns look like noise. After it forms, the same patterns become obvious. This is why the idea of chance dissolves the moment awareness sharpens. Randomness is not a force. It is a placeholder for unrecognized order. This moment is better understood as convergence. A meeting point between internal alignment and external stimulus. Not destiny. Not selection. Function. When attention becomes sufficiently organized, it begins to resonate with information that matches its structure. This is resonance, not belief. You did not need to agree with anything here for the signal to register. Agreement is mental. Resonance is structural. Algorithms respond to behavior. Wisdom responds to direction. Behavior can be accidental. Direction cannot. Even curiosity has a vector. Even boredom has a frequency. What brought you here is not the story you tell yourself about how you found the video, but the quieter fact that something in you was already oriented toward this layer of meaning. The signal did not create that orientation. It matched it. This is why explanations that rely solely on external mechanics always feel incomplete. They describe delivery, not reception. Millions can be shown the same message. Only a few will experience recognition. The difference is not intelligence or spirituality. It is readiness. Readiness is the nervous system's capacity to register coherence without needing it to be entertaining, dramatic, or validating. When that capacity comes online, encounters like this stop feeling coincidental and start feeling precise. Precision does not mean comfort. Often it arrives as a subtle pressure, a pause, a sense that something has clicked without fully explaining itself yet. That sensation is not mystery for its own sake. It is the feeling of alignment beginning to stabilize. And once stabilization begins, reality reorganizes its feedback. Not to impress you, but to stay consistent with the signal you are now emitting. This is why dismissing this moment as random actually creates more friction than accepting it as functional. Acceptance does not require belief in grand narratives. It only requires acknowledging that your attention did not land here accidentally, even if your mind wants to keep that explanation intact for safety. Safety prefers chance. Growth prefers clarity. This convergence is not asking you to do anything dramatic. It is asking you to notice that something is already happening. Recognition precedes choice. And recognition has occurred. Like the video now as a confirmation that this recognition has landed. What must be clarified now, before misunderstanding distorts the process, is what Sophia Hokhmat is actually observing. Because if the mind fills that gap incorrectly, observation becomes fear, fantasy, or self-importance. None of those are accurate. What is being observed is not behavior. Not morality. Not identity. Not your past. Not your intentions as words. What is being observed is direction. Direction is the simplest and most revealing metric of consciousness. It answers one question only: where is your energy moving when it is not being managed by habit or distraction? This is what ancient systems measured when they spoke of wisdom watching. Not actions, which are often reactive. Not beliefs, which are often inherited. But vector. The angle at which your attention, intention, and vitality are pointing over time. Sophia Hokhmat is not an entity collecting information. She is the ordering intelligence that responds automatically to coherence the way physical systems respond to structure. When alignment reaches a certain threshold, it becomes detectable. Not because something external becomes curious, but because the signal becomes distinct enough to interact with larger patterns without distortion. Observation happens at that moment because interaction becomes possible. This is why morality plays no role here. Morality evaluates behavior against rules. Wisdom tracks coherence against itself. A person can behave well while remaining fragmented. Another can behave imperfectly while becoming aligned. Observation does not reward or punish either. It responds only to the stability of the signal. Identity also has no relevance. Names, roles, stories about who you are or who you are becoming are surface phenomena. Direction exists underneath all of them. Energetic vector is revealed not in what you claim to want, but in what you repeatedly return to. Where your attention settles when nothing forces it. Where your emotional energy loops when it is unobserved. Where your sense of meaning points when novelty fades. These are not judged. They are read. And reading occurs impersonally, without preference, the same way gravity reads mass or electricity reads conductivity. This is why Sophia Hokhmat must be understood as impersonal intelligence rather than character or deity. Personification is a teaching tool, not a literal description. Wisdom does not care who you think you are. It cares whether your inner systems are aligned enough to carry additional charge without breaking. Observation is simply the moment that question becomes relevant. Nothing about this is intimate in the emotional sense, yet it is precise. It does not lean in. It does not pull away. It remains constant. When your signal becomes coherent, it registers. When it scatters, it fades back into background noise. No offense is taken. No favor is granted. Order responds to order. Understanding this removes both fear and ego. There is nothing to hide, because nothing personal is being evaluated. There is nothing to claim, because nothing is being awarded. There is only the quiet fact that direction has become readable. And once direction is readable, interaction begins to reorganize around it automatically. This is the clarity required to proceed. Observation is not about you as a person. It is about your signal as a pattern. And patterns, once recognized, can be refined. Before anything else unfolds, the central misunderstanding must be corrected. Observation, as it operates here, is not judgment. It is not assessment. It is not evaluation against a standard you are expected to meet. Observation is calibration. And calibration exists for one purpose only: alignment. Modern consciousness has been conditioned to fear being seen. Surveillance implies threat. Evaluation implies punishment. Exposure implies vulnerability. These associations are not accidental. They are the result of systems that learned how to control behavior by attaching danger to visibility. But ancient understanding operated from a different foundation entirely. To be seen by wisdom was not to be scrutinized. It was to be brought into harmony. Calibration is a mechanical process, not a moral one. When an instrument drifts out of tune, it is not shamed. It is adjusted. When a signal becomes distorted, it is not condemned. It is refined. Observation in this sense is simply the moment when enough coherence exists for refinement to be possible. Before that moment, interference would do more harm than good. After it, adjustment becomes natural. This is why ancient traditions described wisdom as watching without eyes and measuring without scales. They understood that intelligence does not need to judge in order to respond. It only needs to register deviation and resonance. When your internal systems move toward alignment, calibration begins automatically. When they move away, feedback appears. Not as punishment, but as friction. Not as failure, but as information. Modern fear of being seen comes from the assumption that observation exists to extract value or enforce compliance. Wisdom operates on the opposite principle. It does not extract. It stabilizes. It does not enforce. It balances. When Sophia Hokhmat's observation becomes perceptible, it is not because you have been placed under scrutiny, but because your inner state has become responsive enough to register feedback without collapsing. This reframes discomfort entirely. Resistance, confusion, or pressure are not signs of being judged. They are signs of recalibration occurring. When alignment increases, misalignment becomes more obvious. Not louder, but clearer. What once blended into background noise begins to stand out. This clarity can feel unsettling if you expect comfort to be the signal of correctness. But wisdom has never used comfort as its metric. It uses coherence. Ancient initiates welcomed observation because it meant distortion could finally be corrected. To be unseen was to remain static. To be seen was to be refined. They did not ask to be watched as individuals. They learned to become readable as patterns. And once readable, guidance could flow without force, instruction without coercion. Calibration does not hurry. It does not overwhelm structures that cannot hold adjustment. It redistributes pressure gradually until balance emerges. This is why nothing dramatic is required of you here. There is no test to pass. No identity to perform. No standard to meet. Calibration works by revealing what is already out of alignment and allowing it to reorganize at its own pace. Understanding this dissolves the final layer of fear around observation. Nothing is being weighed. Nothing is being decided about your worth. Something is being tuned. And tuning is always an act of care, even when it feels uncomfortable at first. Once this is understood, resistance softens. The nervous system stops bracing. And alignment becomes something you cooperate with rather than defend against. At this stage, energy stops being an abstract concept and becomes a practical reality. Not something mystical, not something symbolic, but something precise. Energy, in its functional sense, is the alignment between intention, attention, and action. When these three move in the same direction, energy becomes directed. When they scatter, energy leaks. Nothing more complicated than that. Most people live with misalignment normalized. They intend one thing, attend to another, and act according to habit rather than clarity. This fragmentation creates exhaustion without progress, motion without movement. Not because power is lacking, but because direction has not been chosen consciously. Up until now, that misalignment could persist without immediate consequence. At this stage, it cannot. Once observation becomes active, energy that remains undirected begins to produce friction instead of neutrality. This is why direction must happen now. Not later, not after understanding everything, not after healing everything, not after certainty arrives. Direction does not require completion. It requires participation. Waiting for readiness is itself a direction, and often one that keeps energy circulating in delay rather than coherence. The moment alignment becomes possible, postponement becomes leakage. To direct energy does not mean forcing yourself into discipline or suppressing desire. It means choosing where your life force flows before it is claimed by default patterns. Attention is the gate. Where attention settles consistently, energy organizes. Where it is scattered, energy dissolves. This is not philosophy. It is observable function. Muscles strengthen where load is applied. Pathways deepen where repetition occurs. Reality responds to sustained direction the same way. At this stage, you may notice increased sensitivity to where your attention goes. Certain thoughts drain faster than before. Certain distractions feel heavier. Certain emotional loops lose their ability to entertain. This is not punishment. It is feedback. Once alignment becomes available, inefficiency becomes noticeable. What once passed unnoticed now registers as friction because your system is capable of more coherent operation. This is why ancient teachings emphasize direction over belief. Belief can exist without alignment. Direction cannot. You can believe anything while your attention remains fragmented. Energy does not respond to belief. It responds to coherence. When intention, attention, and action begin to converge, even imperfectly, guidance shifts from external to internal. Not because something grants permission, but because the system becomes readable to itself. Direction begins with small, consistent choices. Where you return your attention when it wanders. What you feed emotionally when no one is watching. What you repeat internally without questioning. These are not minor details. They are votes cast continuously for the structure of your future experience. No single choice determines the outcome. Pattern does. This is the moment when energy stops being endured and starts being used. Not dramatically. Quietly. Deliberately. Direction does not require intensity. It requires honesty. Honesty about where your energy has been going, and willingness to redirect it without self-punishment. That willingness is the threshold. Comment with the words, "I am ready," to anchor this timeline. Wisdom moves toward individuals now not because individuals have become more important, but because structures have become less stable. This distinction matters. When collective systems are coherent, intelligence can work through institutions, traditions, and shared symbols. When those systems fragment, intelligence adapts. Not emotionally. Functionally. It looks for stability where stability can still be found. The current collective field is unstable. Information moves faster than integration. Stimulation outpaces meaning. Identity multiplies faster than coherence. This instability amplifies everything. Chaos becomes louder. Clarity becomes rarer. And in unstable fields, small points of coherence carry disproportionate influence. Not influence as authority, but as regulation. Like a grounded wire in an overloaded circuit, coherence prevents collapse simply by being present. This is why wisdom no longer prioritizes empires, movements, or mass awakenings. Those require shared alignment, and shared alignment cannot be forced in a fragmented field. Individuals, however, can stabilize internally even when the collective cannot. One coherent nervous system can regulate an entire environment more effectively than thousands of unregulated ones operating in agreement. This is not destiny. It is physics. Understanding this prevents ego inflation. You are not chosen. You are functional. You are not special because you are noticed. You are noticeable because coherence has reached a threshold where it can interact without distortion. Wisdom does not flatter. It responds. And response follows stability wherever it appears. Ancient periods of transition followed the same pattern. When civilizations destabilized, wisdom withdrew from institutions and resurfaced in individuals who could carry it quietly. Not as leaders, not as saviors, but as stabilizers. They were not tasked with fixing the world. They were tasked with not adding distortion to it. That alone altered trajectories more than overt intervention ever could. This is the role emerging now. Not dramatic. Not heroic. Subtle. To hold clarity without superiority. To hold awareness without despair. To remain coherent without needing consensus. In unstable systems, pressure seeks release. Coherent individuals provide that release simply by not amplifying noise. Their presence lowers entropy locally. Their attention reorganizes space without instruction. This also explains why the call feels personal without being emotional. Wisdom does not recruit through excitement. It signals through resonance. Those who can respond without needing validation naturally orient toward this work. Not because they want responsibility, but because misalignment becomes uncomfortable once coherence is possible. At that point, participation is not a choice driven by identity. It is a correction driven by function. Importantly, this does not require withdrawal from life. Wisdom does not move toward individuals to isolate them. It does so to seed coherence where fragmentation dominates. The more internally aligned you become, the less reactive you are to collective instability. This does not make you indifferent. It makes you effective. Reaction spreads instability. Coherence absorbs it. This is why timing matters. In stable eras, coherence blends into the background. In unstable eras, it becomes structurally necessary. Wisdom follows necessity. Not hope. Not belief. Not aspiration. Function. Understanding this removes both pressure and fantasy. You are not being asked to carry the world. You are being asked to stop leaking yourself into it unconsciously. That alone is enough to matter now. Before anything can be redirected, one principle has to be restored to its rightful place. Attention is not neutral. It is not a passive function of the mind. It is not a harmless byproduct of thought. Attention is an active force, and wherever it rests, structure forms. Most people have been taught to think of attention as something they either have or lack, something to improve for productivity or discipline. This framing hides its real function. Attention is architectural. It shapes inner reality the way gravity shapes matter. What you attend to repeatedly becomes reinforced. What you return to consistently becomes familiar. And what becomes familiar eventually feels true, regardless of whether it is aligned or not. This is why repetition matters more than intensity. A single powerful insight changes very little if attention does not return to it. Meanwhile, small unnoticed thoughts repeated daily become the foundation of identity. Attention does not ask whether something is helpful before it builds around it. It simply builds where it is placed. Over time, inner structures form that feel permanent, but were actually assembled unconsciously through repetition. This is how inner realities are constructed. Not through dramatic decisions, but through quiet focus. What you rehearse internally becomes the default environment of your nervous system. What you emotionally revisit becomes the lens through which new information is filtered. Attention lays pathways. Repetition turns pathways into roads. Roads eventually determine where movement feels natural and where it feels resisted. Once this is understood, responsibility shifts. Not into blame, but into clarity. You begin to see that your inner world was not imposed on you fully formed. It was assembled gradually by where your attention was pulled, where it lingered, and where it returned when nothing demanded it. This is why attention is the true creative force long before action appears. Action follows the architecture attention has already built. Attention also explains why change often feels difficult even when desire is strong. Desire points forward, but attention remains anchored to familiar patterns. The system follows attention, not intention alone. This is not a failure of will. It is a function of structure. You cannot move freely through a space that has been built to support a different direction. First, the structure must change. And structure changes only through new patterns of attention. This is why awareness is emphasized so strongly at this stage. Not awareness as observation of thoughts for insight, but awareness of where attention goes when it is unclaimed. Those moments reveal the true architecture of your inner life. They show what has been reinforced enough to pull you back automatically. Seeing this is not meant to create urgency or self-criticism. It is meant to restore authorship. Once attention is recognized as creative, it stops being treated casually. Not rigidly, not obsessively, but respectfully. You begin to understand that every return of attention is a small act of construction. Every withdrawal is a small act of decay. Over time, these acts accumulate. Inner reality becomes stable or unstable not by fate, but by focus. This understanding changes everything quietly. You stop trying to force outcomes and start shaping the ground they grow from. Attention becomes deliberate without becoming tense. Direction becomes possible without struggle. Because once attention is no longer neutral, it becomes available. And what becomes available can be guided. Energy does not disappear dramatically. It leaks quietly. Almost always in ways that feel normal enough to escape notice. That is why fragmentation persists for years without being questioned. Not because power is missing, but because loss has been normalized. These leaks are not moral failures. They are mechanical outcomes of where attention has been trained to go. A system that is never inspected continues operating as it was conditioned to operate. No blame is required to see this clearly. Diagnosis is enough. One of the most common leaks is attention spent on outcomes that are not present. Rehearsing futures that have not arrived or replaying past moments that have already completed pulls energy out of the only place where it can actually be used. This does not mean planning or reflection are wrong. It means unexamined repetition drains vitality without producing new information. Energy circulates but does not build. Another leak appears as emotional identification. Emotions arise to deliver information, then complete their function. When attention continues feeding them after their message has been received, they turn into loops. These loops feel familiar, even protective, but they consume energy without generating movement. The system remains busy while direction stalls. Again, this is not weakness. It is habit. Comparison is another major fracture point. Attention diverted into measuring your internal state against external timelines creates constant micro-adjustments that never stabilize. The system is always recalibrating against moving targets. Energy that could consolidate into coherence is instead spent tracking differences that have no functional value. This leak often disguises itself as motivation or self-improvement, but its signature is exhaustion without clarity. Information consumption without integration is equally costly. Taking in content faster than it can be embodied creates cognitive density without structural support. The mind becomes crowded while the system remains unchanged. Attention keeps moving, but nothing settles long enough to become usable. This is one of the most efficient ways energy is drained in modern environments, and it is rarely recognized as such. Worry operates similarly. It feels active, even responsible, but it is attention applied without agency. The system stays alert without gaining leverage. Energy remains engaged without producing alignment. Over time, this creates the illusion of effort while slowly weakening capacity. The body feels tired, not because too much has been done, but because nothing has been resolved. What all these leaks share is fragmentation. Attention is split across too many unintegrated points. None of them are large enough individually to feel dangerous. Together, they prevent coherence from forming. This is why change often feels difficult even when insight is present. Energy is available, but it is distributed too thinly to generate momentum. Recognizing these leaks does not require fixing them immediately. Awareness alone begins consolidation. When attention notices where it has been leaking, it naturally starts to withdraw from unproductive loops without force. This is not discipline. It is efficiency returning. Fragmentation is not a personal flaw. It is a learned condition. And learned conditions can be unlearned without drama. Once leaks are seen clearly, energy stops escaping unconsciously. It begins to collect. And collected energy does not need to be pushed. It moves on its own toward coherence. Resistance rarely announces itself honestly. If it arrived as fear, it could be faced directly. If it appeared as refusal, it could be examined. But at this stage, resistance is more subtle. It disguises itself as distraction, as fatigue, as doubt, as the sudden urge to do anything other than remain present with what is reorganizing. This is not a malfunction. It is a protective mechanism doing exactly what it was designed to do. The structures that formed your identity were built to maintain continuity, not truth. Their role has always been to keep the system predictable enough to survive. When coherence begins to increase, those structures sense instability. Not danger in the dramatic sense, but loss of relevance. And they respond by scattering attention. Distraction is the most efficient way to interrupt reorganization without triggering alarm. It feels harmless. Reasonable. You may notice attention drifting, restlessness increasing, the impulse to check something, fix something, consume something. None of this means alignment is failing. It means alignment is becoming strong enough to challenge existing patterns. Resistance appears not because you are doing something wrong, but because something old is no longer necessary. Fatigue often follows. Not physical exhaustion, but a heaviness that suggests slowing down or stopping altogether. This fatigue is not a depletion of energy. It is the system conserving resources while it recalibrates. Old patterns required constant output to maintain themselves. As they loosen, there is a temporary gap where energy has not yet consolidated into a new structure. That gap feels like tiredness. It passes if it is not misinterpreted. Doubt is another common expression. Questions arise that did not feel urgent before. Is this real? Is this useful? Is this necessary? Doubt here is not discernment. It is a stabilizing reflex. The mind searches for certainty because certainty allows it to lock attention back into familiar grooves. This does not mean the questions are wrong. It means their timing is functional. They appear when control is slipping. The mistake many make at this point is assuming resistance means failure. That interpretation creates unnecessary struggle. Resistance is not an obstacle to alignment. It is evidence that alignment is occurring. If nothing were changing, nothing would push back. Friction only appears when movement begins. The key is not to eliminate resistance, but to read it accurately. Distraction points to where attention has been habitually outsourced. Fatigue points to where energy has been spent maintaining outdated structures. Doubt points to where identity is still tied to certainty rather than coherence. Each signal contains information. None of them require force. When resistance is met with curiosity instead of correction, it softens. When it is allowed without indulgence, it passes. The system learns that reorganization does not equal threat. Over time, resistance stops needing to appear as loudly. Attention stabilizes more quickly. Presence becomes less effortful. This is not about overcoming yourself. It is about allowing protective mechanisms to stand down naturally as they realize their job has changed. You are not losing control. You are outgrowing the need for it. And distraction, fatigue, and doubt are simply the echoes of an old structure adjusting to a new level of coherence. Before expansion becomes possible, something counterintuitive occurs. The field narrows. Options reduce. Attention consolidates. What once felt open and diffuse begins to feel focused, even constrained. This is the phase many misinterpret as loss, stagnation, or limitation. In reality, it is refinement. And refinement is not the opposite of freedom. It is the condition that makes freedom effective. The narrowing of the river is a natural consequence of coherence forming. When energy stops leaking in multiple directions, it gathers. When it gathers, it must move through fewer channels. This does not reduce power. It increases it. A wide river moves gently but shapes little. A narrow river carves stone. Precision is not restriction. It is concentration. At this stage, certain interests lose their pull. Certain conversations feel draining rather than stimulating. Certain identities that once felt meaningful begin to feel hollow. This is not because something is wrong, but because the system is withdrawing investment from patterns that no longer return sufficient coherence. Attention is becoming selective. And selectivity is a sign of maturation, not deprivation. The discomfort that accompanies narrowing comes from a mind trained to equate freedom with endless choice. Choice feels expansive. Precision feels limiting. But wisdom defines freedom differently. Freedom is not the ability to move in every direction. It is the ability to move decisively in one direction without internal resistance. Narrowing removes internal argument. It reduces friction. It allows force to accumulate. Compression is the mechanism at work here. Pressure applied consciously increases density. Density increases gravity. And gravity draws opportunity, synchronicity, and support without pursuit. This is why ancient initiates did not chase signs or confirmation. They cultivated internal density until reality responded naturally. Not through magic, but through alignment. Many abandon this phase because it feels like something is being taken away. But what is actually being removed is noise. Excess input. Fragmented attention. Obligations that depended on unconscious availability. When narrowing is resisted, it feels like loss. When it is understood, it feels like relief. The system finally has room to organize itself around what matters. This is also why impatience can arise here. The mind wants expansion to return quickly. It wants validation that narrowing was worth it. But refinement works quietly. It strengthens the channel before increasing the flow. If expansion came too soon, it would scatter again. Wisdom does not add volume to an unstable structure. It strengthens the structure first. The narrowing of the river does not last forever. It lasts until the channel can hold more without fracturing. During this time, fewer things will feel right. Fewer directions will feel available. This is not a punishment. It is guidance. Direction is becoming clear because distraction is no longer being tolerated. When you allow narrowing without interpreting it as failure, pressure transforms into momentum. What once felt constricting begins to feel focused. Energy stops arguing with itself. Movement becomes smoother, quieter, more deliberate. And when expansion returns, it does so with force that is usable, not overwhelming. This phase asks for trust without fantasy. Precision without rigidity. Allowing without collapse. Narrowing is not the end of possibility. It is the preparation that makes possibility real. Control is often mistaken for strength. Effort is mistaken for commitment. Tension is mistaken for focus. These confusions form early, when survival depends on constant adjustment and vigilance. But as coherence forms, these strategies become inefficient. Not wrong. Outdated. Control begins to fall away not because discipline is lost, but because it is no longer required. Control is what the system uses when internal alignment is missing. It compensates for fragmentation by applying pressure. It tightens attention, suppresses impulses, overrides feedback. This works temporarily, but it is exhausting. Control must be maintained continuously. The moment it relaxes, old patterns return. This is why so many people feel trapped in cycles of effort and collapse. The structure was never aligned enough to sustain movement without force. Coherence operates differently. When intention, attention, and action align, movement becomes self-reinforcing. Less effort is required because energy is no longer arguing with itself. Direction becomes obvious. Choices simplify. The system begins to move downhill rather than uphill. Control fades because there is nothing left to manage aggressively. Internal knots are what make control seem necessary. These knots are points where attention, emotion, and belief have twisted around unresolved experiences. They form as protective responses. They tighten automatically when similar situations arise. Each knot redirects energy away from flow and into tension. The more knots present, the more control is needed to keep things functioning. Ancient systems understood this clearly. They did not focus on adding techniques or increasing willpower. They focused on untying knots. A knotted system cannot transmit energy cleanly. Even the strongest intention will be distorted as it passes through unresolved tension. This distortion is not conscious. It happens automatically, beneath awareness, which is why effort often feels ineffective despite sincerity. Removing obstacles changes everything. When a knot loosens, energy that was bound there becomes available without effort. Movement resumes naturally. This is why coherence feels like relief rather than achievement. Nothing new is added. Something old is released. Force is replaced by clarity. Effort is replaced by momentum. Control resists feedback. Coherence listens to it. When feedback is ignored, pressure builds until something breaks. When feedback is integrated, adjustment happens early and gently. This is why aligned systems appear calm even under challenge. They are not suppressing reaction. They are processing it efficiently. As coherence increases, you may notice a reduced need to monitor yourself. Less self-correction. Less internal commentary. Less effort to stay on track. This is not complacency. It is trust earned through alignment. The system no longer needs to be watched constantly because it has been tuned. Letting control fall away does not mean abandoning responsibility. It means shifting responsibility from enforcement to maintenance. You stop pushing and start listening. You stop forcing outcomes and start removing friction. The work becomes quieter. More precise. Less dramatic. This is the paradox of coherence. As alignment strengthens, effort decreases. As effort decreases, movement improves. What once required discipline becomes natural. What once required control becomes unnecessary. Not because you gave up, but because the system finally learned how to move without fighting itself. When coherence stabilizes, something subtle but decisive begins to form. Density. Not heaviness, not pressure, but concentration. Energy that was once dispersed across countless concerns, reactions, and identities begins to gather. And when energy gathers, gravity emerges. Not metaphorically, but functionally. Systems with density influence their environment without effort. Most people misunderstand synchronicity because they approach it from the outside. They look for signs, chase opportunities, or try to think their way into alignment. But gravity does not chase what it attracts. It does not signal its presence. It simply bends space around itself. When internal coherence reaches a certain density, reality begins to curve toward it naturally. Not because anything is being asked for, but because alignment has created a stable point that interaction can organize around. This is why pursuit is unnecessary and often counterproductive at this stage. Pursuit implies lack. It creates outward tension. Gravity works in the opposite direction. It is inwardly settled. It does not lean forward. It does not reach. It holds. And holding changes everything. Opportunities that once required effort begin to appear without being sought. Encounters line up without planning. Information arrives when it can be integrated rather than when it overwhelms. This is not magic. It is alignment. A coherent system produces fewer conflicting signals. Fewer conflicting signals create less noise. Less noise makes patterns easier to detect. When patterns are easier to detect, response becomes precise. Precision reduces wasted motion. Over time, this efficiency compounds into what looks like effortless flow from the outside. Density forms through sustained coherence. Not intensity, not force, not obsession. Repetition without contradiction. Attention that returns to the same orientation even after disruption. Emotion that completes its message without being recycled. Action that reflects intention instead of compensating for misalignment. These conditions slowly increase mass within the system. And mass, once sufficient, bends probability. This is why ancient initiates did not chase visions or confirmations. They understood that chasing disperses energy. Instead, they refined themselves until interaction became inevitable. The world did not respond because they demanded it. It responded because it had no reason not to. Coherence created compatibility. Importantly, gravity does not discriminate. It draws what matches the field that generated it. This is why internal clarity matters. If coherence forms around distortion, distortion will be amplified. If it forms around alignment, alignment will deepen. Gravity is neutral. It magnifies whatever structure generates it. This is why earlier stages emphasized calibration and direction. Density without clarity is unstable. As gravity strengthens, the urge to seek diminishes. Not because desire disappears, but because the system no longer experiences lack. Movement becomes responsive instead of reactive. Timing improves without conscious calculation. You stop needing to convince reality to cooperate because cooperation emerges from compatibility. This phase often feels anticlimactic to those expecting spectacle. There are fewer highs. Fewer dramatic moments. More consistency. More quiet confirmation. But this is precisely the sign of coherence doing its work. Stability replaces intensity. Precision replaces urgency. Gravity generated internally does not announce itself. It reveals itself through ease. Through fewer obstacles. Through encounters that feel timely rather than forced. This is not the reward for alignment. It is the consequence of it. When coherence holds, reality responds because it can. Before understanding can stabilize, sensation must register. Wisdom does not arrive first as thought. It arrives as signal. And the body is the first place that signal becomes readable. Long before ideas form, the nervous system has already responded. This is not symbolic language. It is functional reality. The body is not separate from alignment. It is the primary instrument through which alignment is detected. Thought interprets after the fact. Sensation reports in real time. Subtle shifts in breath, posture, tension, temperature, or pressure are not side effects. They are data. The body speaks in gradients, not conclusions. When coherence increases, the body registers it immediately. When misalignment appears, it responds before the mind can explain why. This is why intellectual understanding alone never produces lasting change. Thought can agree with anything. The body cannot. It either resonates or it contracts. Expansion and contraction are its language. Ease and resistance are its signals. These responses are not emotional indulgences. They are orientation cues. Ignoring them forces the system to rely on control. Listening to them allows coherence to self-correct. Modern conditioning trains attention upward, away from sensation, into abstraction. This creates a gap where decisions are made without feedback. Over time, that gap widens. The body becomes something to manage instead of consult. Wisdom re-enters the system when that gap closes. When attention returns to sensation without analysis, alignment becomes detectable again. You may notice this as a subtle settling when something is true, or a tightening when something is not aligned, even if it appears logical. This is not intuition as mysticism. It is integration. The body synthesizes information faster than conscious thought because it does not need to narrate. It simply responds. The ancient understanding of the body as a temple was never about sanctification. It was about accuracy. The body registers coherence with far greater precision than belief systems ever could. This is why practices across cultures emphasized posture, breath, rhythm, and repetition. Not to perform spirituality, but to stabilize the instrument so signal could pass through without distortion. When attention returns to the body, presence deepens naturally. You stop chasing meaning and start detecting alignment. This changes how decisions are made. Instead of choosing based on expectation or fear, you choose based on resonance. This does not make life easier in a superficial sense. It makes it clearer. Clarity reduces wasted motion. Embodiment is not about controlling sensation. It is about inhabiting it. Allowing sensation to inform without immediately interpreting. This restores a feedback loop that fragmentation disrupted. The more consistently this loop is honored, the less effort is required to stay aligned. The system adjusts itself. Directing energy becomes simpler when the body is included. You feel when attention has wandered too far. You sense when coherence is thinning. You recognize when something fits without needing justification. This is not passivity. It is precision. Wisdom flows through the body first because the body cannot lie about alignment. It does not exaggerate. It does not rationalize. It simply registers. When you learn to listen without trying to correct or explain, alignment becomes experiential rather than conceptual. And what is experienced does not need to be forced. It organizes itself naturally. Sovereignty is often misunderstood because it is confused with control. Control dominates. It overrides. It imposes. Sovereignty does none of these things. Sovereignty is presence with authority. It is the capacity to remain inhabited within yourself without needing to force outcomes or withdraw from engagement. Force appears when presence is absent. When attention leaves the body, the system compensates by tightening. When alignment is unstable, control is used to create temporary order. Sovereignty emerges when alignment is stable enough that control becomes unnecessary. Nothing needs to be enforced because coherence governs behavior naturally. This is why sovereignty does not require opposition. It does not need enemies to define itself. It does not assert through resistance or rebellion. It simply occupies its own center fully. From that center, engagement becomes selective. Not everything deserves access to your attention. Not every demand requires response. This selectivity is not avoidance. It is precision. Selective engagement is one of the clearest signs of sovereignty. You begin to notice that fewer things pull you automatically. Fewer situations provoke immediate reaction. Not because you have suppressed response, but because you are present enough to choose. Presence creates a pause. In that pause, authority emerges. The system responds from alignment rather than habit. Withdrawal is not sovereignty. Isolation is not mastery. Sovereignty remains available to life without being consumed by it. It participates without leaking. It listens without absorbing distortion. This balance is rare because it requires trust in coherence rather than reliance on defense. But once coherence is established, defense relaxes naturally. Authority without domination feels quiet. There is no need to convince or prove. Boundaries form without being announced. Decisions clarify without being justified. This is not indifference. It is stability. The system knows where it stands, so it does not need to broadcast or protect that position aggressively. You may notice this as a reduced urge to explain yourself. Less need to correct others. Less compulsion to manage perception. These are not losses. They are signs that attention has returned home. When attention is anchored internally, external validation loses its leverage. Engagement becomes intentional rather than reactive. Sovereignty also respects feedback. Domination ignores it. Withdrawal avoids it. Sovereignty integrates it. When something does not align, it is felt and adjusted without drama. When something fits, it is allowed to deepen. This responsiveness keeps the system adaptable without becoming chaotic. Importantly, sovereignty does not mean rigidity. Presence allows flexibility because it maintains orientation even as conditions change. You can adjust without losing yourself. You can engage without being pulled off center. This is the practical expression of authority grounded in coherence rather than force. As sovereignty stabilizes, life begins to meet you differently. Interactions simplify. Conflict reduces. Not because others change, but because your participation changes. You are no longer available to patterns that require fragmentation to function. And without force, those patterns dissolve on their own. This is the mature phase of alignment. Not dramatic. Not performative. Quietly powerful. Presence becomes the governing principle. Selective engagement becomes the practice. Authority emerges naturally when nothing inside is being abandoned. What happens from this point forward is not a conclusion. It is a change in how participation occurs. Nothing here completes a process. Completion implies an end state, a finish line, a moment after which effort stops. What has begun instead is orientation. And orientation, once established, does not reverse easily. Initiation is often misunderstood as an event. In reality, it is a shift in relationship. Before this moment, attention could wander without consequence. Direction could remain unconscious without friction. Now, attention has weight. Direction produces feedback. Participation has become active rather than accidental. This is why returning fully to the previous mode of unconscious engagement will feel increasingly uncomfortable. Not because something forbids it, but because coherence has made contrast visible. Irreversibility does not mean rigidity. It means clarity. Once you see how attention shapes inner architecture, you cannot unsee it. Once you feel how coherence stabilizes the system, fragmentation no longer feels neutral. This does not trap you. It liberates you from confusion about why certain patterns no longer satisfy. You are not losing options. You are outgrowing noise. From here, progress is not measured by intensity, insight, or external change. It is measured by consistency. By how often attention returns to alignment without force. By how quickly feedback is integrated instead of resisted. By how naturally engagement becomes selective. These are quiet metrics. They do not announce themselves. But they compound. Participation replaces striving at this stage. You are no longer trying to become something. You are cooperating with a process already underway. Cooperation does not require constant effort. It requires honesty. When attention drifts, it is noticed and returned. When misalignment appears, it is adjusted without punishment. When coherence deepens, it is allowed to stabilize without rushing to display it. Nothing external needs to change immediately for this to be real. The nervous system reorganizes first. Perception follows. Behavior adjusts last. Trying to reverse that order creates strain. Allowing it preserves momentum. This is why patience emerges naturally when participation replaces ambition. You are no longer chasing outcomes. You are maintaining orientation. From this point forward, guidance does not arrive as commands. It arrives as timing. As reduced friction. As fewer internal arguments. As a sense that movement happens when it is appropriate rather than when it is forced. This does not make life predictable. It makes it workable. You respond instead of react. You choose instead of compensate. There is no pressure to do anything dramatic with this. There is also no requirement to retreat from the world. Participation happens within life, not outside it. You continue engaging, building, relating. But the way energy moves through those engagements has changed. It is less scattered. Less defensive. Less performative. More precise. This is not a state to maintain perfectly. It is a relationship to sustain gently. Coherence strengthens through use, not through guarding. Every time attention returns without force, the system learns. Every time participation is chosen consciously, alignment deepens. Nothing has been taken from you here. Something has been restored. And restoration, once recognized, continues quietly on its own. Subscribe and share this with someone who needs to hear it before their timeline closes.